Alright guys, how's it going? I'm going to talk a little bit about power supplies today. Now, even if you're not that interested in power supplies, this video might be quite interesting to you, just to give you an indication and a little bit of insight into how the industry works in some cases. So there's a little bit about that in this as well. Now, if you're buying a new graphics card, something like that, maybe you need to upgrade your power supply too. You'll learn a little bit about that here as well. If you're a system builder, you obviously know a fair bit about PCs already. Power supplies are one of those things though that people generally think they know a lot about, and they really don't know as much as what they thought. There's quite a lot of myth and legend about power supplies on the internet. It's very difficult to tell, what's true and what isn't. I'm going to deal a little bit with efficiency right now. Get this part out of the way first. So, something I get asked a lot is, does a 700 watt power supply use more power than a 350 watt power supply? Now, in order to answer that properly, I'm going to do it this way. Take three PCs, 1, 2 and 3, identical in every way apart from the power supply. The first one's got a 350 watt supply, the second one's 700 watt supply, and the third PC has simply got a 200 watt supply. You can look at the efficiency below. So 80% for the first, 80% for the second, 70% for PC3. Right, now, if I plug a watt meter into the wall and then plug my PC in, through the power socket, it will come to about 250 watts at the wall. Now, I've got a 700 watt PC, so let's say this second PC is mine, right? I've got a 700 watt power supply, at 80% efficiency. When I game on it, it draws about 250 watts at the wall. I've measured it lots of times, and that's around about what it is. But that actually means that the actual components in the PC are only drawing 200 watts because my PSU efficiency is 80%. 80% of 250 is 200 watts. So the answer is no, a 700 watt power supply does not draw more watts than a 350 watt power supply. It's all about the efficiency in that case. 350 watts, exact same. It will draw 250 watt at the wall if it's got an 80% efficiency. Now, look at PC3. It's only 200 watts power supply and it's got a pretty low efficiency at 70%. You look at what that's drawing at the wall, 286 watts, which is 36 watts more than the other two. That's just simply down to the efficiency. However, it's still providing the 200 watts of power. It's a 200 watt power supply, and if it's a true 200 watt power supply, it should be able to provide 200 watts of power to your PC components. This part never changes. Right? If your PC draws 200 watts, that's what it needs. It's just that the power supply needs to pull more from the wall depending on how efficient it is. So that's dealt with two myths, really, because a lot of people think that this 200 watt power supply, if it was only 70% efficient, it would only be able to provide 70% of this 200 watts. But that's not how it works. What it means is it needs to pull 286 watts at the wall instead of 250 in order to provide the 200 watts that the PC demands. So basically speaking, efficiency only really matters in terms of money. If your PC is drawing more watts at the wall, then that is costing you more in electricity. It's going to add up over the course of a year, so a 70% efficient power supply is going to end up costing you more in the long run compared to an 80% efficient power supply. But that's all it is. So how do you actually know how efficient a power supply is? Well, I'll get to that later, but right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to compare two power supplies. This is scan.co.uk. I'm not an affiliate of Scan, however I do buy a lot of parts from them. I've got pages and pages of parts bought from Scan. I'm a member of a few different distributors in the UK. Now, here you've got an Ace 750 watt power supply, right? Costing £19.80. And the next one we're going to look at is a Corsair 430 watt power supply, costing £36.52. Now, how is it possible? I mean, who would buy this, right? 430 watts and it costs almost £37. It's basically twice the price of this Ace, which has got 750 watts. So you're getting more watts for less money. But are you really getting that? Here's the thing, and I sort of alluded to it at the beginning of the video. This number here, there's no regulation for this. The manufacturer decides what the wattage of the power supply is. using a couple of fairly, let's just say they're playing pretty hard and loose with the rules, yeah. Basically speaking, if you try to put 750 watts through this power supply, it's going to fail. It's either going to just shut your PC down, or it's going to catch fire, or something bad's going to happen. One thing that is not going to happen is you are never ever going to get 750 watts continuous power through this power supply. It's just not going to happen. Now, there's a few hints. If you scroll down, it doesn't matter. Now, you buy a power supply from anywhere, but whether it's Scan or Amazon or eBuyer or Newegg, there's always going to be something like a technical specification telling you exactly what the PSU is all about. I've bought a lot of power supplies, as you can imagine, because every PC I sell needs a power supply, right? And the one thing that is consistent, the one thing that is a good consistent guide of how much power a power supply will actually be able to provide is found in the connectors section. How I know that this Corsair Builder Series 430 watt is a far better power supply than this 750 watt Ace one is all about, I've scrolled past it, it's all about this PCIe power connector. This Ace power supply has one 6-pin PCIe power connector. Now, the Corsair has one 6 and 2-pin PCI power connector. You get other connectors on them. You can get maybe dual 6-pin PCI power connectors, which is actually identical to a 6 and 2-pin in terms of the amount of power that it can deliver. You can also get multiple 6 and 2 pins. These are things that you tend to find on the really high-end, high-quality power supplies. If you check out a 1,000 watt power supply by a reputable manufacturer, it's going to have multiple of these. And this is what really gives you the true indication of how much power a power supply can provide. So what does this 1 times 6-pin PCIe power actually mean? Well, this means that it is, if you look at the connector here, you can see that it's got 6 pins on it. This will be able to provide 75 watts of power to a graphics card. Now, if you look at a graphics card, you can see that they've got connectors that require these 6 pins or these 8 pins to go into the card in order to power it. If your power supply doesn't have enough of these connectors, it's not going to be able to power the graphics card. Now, the thing about this Corsair one is, this 6 and 2 pin PCI power is able to provide 150 watts of power. So that is double the power from this 6 plus 2 pin compared to the 6 pin on this Ace. Right, this will be a surprise to a lot of people, but this is basically the typical PC component power draw. The CPU draws between around about 45 watts and 130 watts. 130 watts is like an extreme high-end CPU, like an Intel 6-core or an AMD FX 8-core. Those are the ones that are up at the 130 watts. Something like an i5, you're talking maybe around about 75 watts or so. Now, the motherboard, the RAM, the disk drives, almost nothing. Even if you light them up, if you max out the PC, it's only going to draw about 20 watts. People were really surprised by that, but these things are not very powerful. They don't draw an awful lot of power. Graphics cards, completely at the other end, but they can be both ways. They can have tiny power draw, 20 watts for very low-end card, all the way up to 300 watts for a single card, even beyond that. So really, what this really means is the big thing on your system power draw is the graphics card. If you're not running a powerful graphics card or even no graphics card at all, you get integrated graphics card these days, of course, on like chips and on the motherboard. Mostly on chips these days. But basically, it's all about the graphics card. If you only need big powerful power supplies if you have got a big powerful graphics card, or multiple graphics cards more like it. The average PC, I'm talking about even like your 980 GTX, which is like the fastest single graphics card you can get now. You don't need a 750 watt power supply for that. It only draws about 200 watts, but at full tilt. Yeah, so I mean, you add up that 200 watts. let's say even if you've got a high-end CPU, that's 130 watts. Assuming that both of them are maxed out at the same time, 20 watts for the motherboard. What's that? 350 watts. You only need half of that 700 plus watts for like the current highest end graphics card. So when somebody tells you need 750 watts, unless you have got, unless you're going for something like the AMD R9 295X2, which is like massive, huge, power hungry and extremely fast graphics card, then you simply do not need a 750 watt power supply. Those should be reserved for dual graphics cards, and powerful ones at that. So try not to panic at this, right? There's quite a lot of information here, but it's actually really, really simple. The PC motherboard provides 75 watts of power, right? So this is why some low-powered graphics cards don't need any connectors. They don't need an extra power connector. They don't need any extra 6 pins, because the motherboard provides all the power that the graphics card needs, right? However, if your power supply has no 6 pins, it means there's no extra watts provided. So the 75 watt maximum is what you are allowed for a graphics card. Talking stuff like the R5 250X, stuff like that. The GTX 750 Ti from Nvidia. Those can run without a 6 pin. If it's got one 6 pin, it means it can provide an extra 75 watts, up to 150 watts maximum. This is what my graphics card requires. This is the sort of mid-range level. If it's got no 6 pin, you're talking entry level. Mid-range is like one 6 pin, which is the R9 270, my current graphics card. If it needs 2 6 pins, you're just a little bit above the mid-range now. That can provide 150 extra watts for your graphics card. So that means 225 watts maximum for a graphics card. If you get one 6 and 2 pin or one 8 pin, that is also an extra 150 watts, up to another maximum of 225. And the really high-end power supplies will come with stuff like one 6 pin and one 8 pin, or even maybe even more than that. But that will give you an extra 225 watts through those pins and up to a maximum of 300 watts. So really, you can see how it is all about the connectors on the power supply. This is what you're looking for. Ignore the wattages, because like I said, they just make it up as they go along. So going back to that efficiency thing, let's have a look at the Corsair one. Right, it says up here it's 80 plus bronze. This means it's got 80 plus efficiency. You get 80 plus silver, 80 plus gold, 80 plus platinum. You can see if you look at it, it'll also say here, the max efficiency is 80%. Now that just says maximum, by the way, yeah? So 8%, that's a good power supply. This is going to be down at 70%. It doesn't actually tell you that though. Again, the manufacturers, they just, they leave out the important information when it doesn't make their power supply look so good. Right, does that mean that this is a bad power supply? In all honesty, there's no such thing as a bad power supply. It's just all about having the power supply to suit your needs. If your graphics card has one 6-pin PCI power requirement, this is probably going to be absolutely fine. You got to think about it from the manufacturer's point of view, right? They can advertise this as a 750 watts. But without the connectors, how are you going to put 750 watts through it? Now you can use a bunch of adapters, of course, and this is how these things go wrong. People start using 4-pin to 6-pin adapters, and then 6-pin to 8-pin adapters, because they think that this 750 watt power supply is capable of providing 750 watts of power. They just need to add adapters to all this stuff. Like these Molexes here, they've got 3 4-pin Molexes, so you can double a couple of these up and make a 6-pin out of it. So all of a sudden, you've doubled the supposed power output of this, but you haven't really doubled anything. It's still the same power supply it always was. All you're going to do now, however, is run too much power through it. You're never going to get near 750 watts ever. You'd be lucky if it maybe does 400 watts without dying on you, this one. But you know what? 400 watts is more than enough for the vast majority of systems. So it is very sneaky, right? This 750 watt number, there's a bunch of them. They're all at it, really. All the smaller guys, all the sort of cheaper brands. It's just pure number inflation. It's all about, the bigger is better. And this mentality is actually prevalent in the entire industry. So this Corsair Builder series is a vastly superior CPU, even though it's only got 430 watts of power. I've actually used one of these in my girlfriend's PCs, and it's running an R9 280X graphics card, which itself needs an 8-pin and a 6-pin. Here's the thing about this, right? This has only got one 6 plus 2 pin, or an 8-pin, right? But I actually quite happily changed one of these Molexes into a 6-pin, two of these Molexes, because I knew that this power supply was more than capable of running that graphics card. Now, if you want to do something like that, you want to start using adapters, do it with a good power supply. I know that this power supply can handle 500 watts because I have sold hundreds of them. It's a very good power supply. I've also sold hundreds of these power supplies. Not this actual one, but one that's very similar to it. It's even cheaper than this £20. The thing is, I do not advertise it. If you're a system builder, do not advertise this as a 750 watt power supply. Do not even advertise what wattage it is at all. This thing will run mid-range PCs quite happily, or lower end PCs quite happily. Just don't advertise it as a 750. Don't let your customer think that they're getting something else, something more capable. The last thing you want is to get this back. The last thing the manufacturer wants is getting this back. That's why they can advertise it as a 750 all they want, but there's only a 6-pin there, so really you're only talking 300-400 watts of power at its best. So I hope that was sort of informative. Starting to learn maybe one or two things about the industry. I find it hard at some points. I found it quite hard because I dislike dishonesty, intensely dislike it in fact, and I'm not going to be dishonest with my customers, but a lot of them would say to me, can I have a 750 watt power supply instead of this one? And I would have to explain to them, I'm trying to explain to them, look, don't worry about the wattages, it doesn't mean anything, but they still come back and say, oh, I really want a 750 watt power supply. Well, yeah, I can give you a 750 watt power supply, but if you really need to run 750 watts through that, you're going to pay at least double what this is. You're not going to get 750 watts of power at this price. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I'll be doing an awful lot more technology videos in the future.